I know this next speaker for the better part of 10 years. He's an attorney. He's an outstanding activist, and he happens to be Shelley's attorney. And he was one of the gentlemen that actually helped make term limits a thing in Arlington, Texas. Please welcome Warren Norrid. I also should note he was on Tucker Carlson just about a week ago.
Thank you all. Before I get started, I wanted to give something to Shelley. Shelley, come back up for a second. Shelley. Shelley hasn't actually ever seen this. This is the document that freed her. It wasn't a pronouncement by the governor or even our helpful lieutenant governor. It was 9 people on the Supreme Court of Texas. And I'm just going to...
And all these attorneys working all night long to prepare this for that.
It was a machine, I'll tell you that. So I'm just going to read the relevant part. You've been called a lot of things. In this document, she's called the relator. So, whereas Shelley Luther, relator, has made application to the Supreme Court of Texas for a writ of habeas corpus, alleging that she is illegally restrained by you in Dallas County, Texas, by virtue of a contempt order issued by the 14th District of Dallas County, Texas. And whereas the Honorable Supreme Court of Texas is of the tentative opinion that a serious question concerning the relief requires further consideration, and the court orders the following. Relator's petition for writ of habeas corpus filed on May 6th. Having been duly considered, it is ordered that relator be released on her personal bond.
Yeah! Woo!
Yeah. She shall not be required to deposit any amount of money to secure her release from your custody. Now, therefore, you are commanded to release Shelley Luther on her personal bond in the terms and conditions of the law, and that she comply with the final decision of the Supreme Court of Texas. Law. Yeah. Go ahead. I always have to point out here that she still has 5 days left, okay? The Supreme Court of Texas can finish looking at this. What we did is we offered our writ, our petition. The court said, we're going to grant this conditionally while we look at it. They gave until the next Monday for the city to respond. That Monday, we filed a document to say, hey, we put that together pretty fast. We'd like a chance to think about this and provide a more exhaustive response or a petition. And the Supreme Court agreed, so they gave us until that next Friday, and then give the city until the Friday after that to respond, which happened last Friday. And so now the Supreme Court of Texas has it all, and they're going to make a decision as to whether or not she has to go back and do the extra 5 days. We all hope not, and this is not a trivial thing to do. It's a big deal. I kind of joke about it. For an attorney to file a writ of habeas corpus petition, it's kind of like the highest level spell a wizard can do. You know, it's just, this is the big thing. You don't do these very often. And so when we were walking around with this in the jail, trying to figure out what window we go to, and they would say, you got to push the button before we'll come to the window. I kid you not, that's what happened. We had to push the button, and then they look at it and say, oh, what is this? We had to go back and forth, and so finally they said, okay, Judge A says that this is all we need. Okay, if Judge A says that, and then they go get her. You know, so, but that was the document that we were walking around with that nobody really knew what to do with. Thank you. And when we talk about these things, of course, Shelley came along as a group of plaintiffs that were challenging all of these things all at once. We were trying to initially make it one system, one pleading to kind of rule them all at the Supreme Court, so we wouldn't have a dozen other cases that slowly wind their way up to the Supreme Court. So we filed that actually the same day that the initial TRO was granted against Shelley on behalf of about a dozen people, including Shelley, but also including Alan Snyder, who was given a citation for the crime of traveling with his wife in Cleburne, Texas. Traveling with his wife into a Walmart, because the governor says you can only travel for essential tasks, and the mayor Scott Kane of Cleburne decided what that means to him is only one person from the household is necessary to do that. So we actually had a real ticket for doing that. And there are some other cases. You've heard about the bar that opened in Ector County. SWAT team shows up. Totally wrong. So there's a number of those kinds of folks that we were representing. The Supreme Court eventually said, we're not going to act on this just now. And so I'll just read what first line of their concurring denial. They said, we're not going to do this right now, but I'll tell you what this means. The first line of what they said was, the Constitution is not suspended when the government declares a disaster.
Amen.
Okay? So you got to realize what happened here. A bunch of us said, please don't make us go through all this other stuff. Can you give us some relief now so we don't have to do all this? And I kind of look at it this way. If a young man asks a young lady, I'd like to take you out tomorrow night. And the young lady says, and she just says, no, I'm not interested, and walks off. That's one message. It's a denial, but it's one message. But what if she says, I'm busy tomorrow night because I'm working and I can't get off, but I'm not busy next Saturday. Here's my cell number. Here's my dad's cell number. You want to call him after Wednesday night at 5 o'clock. Okay, that's still a denial. Still a denial, but it's a very different message, isn't it? I can tell you that this Supreme Court denial is not quite that good, but it's pretty good. And if I had to read the whole thing, which I don't have time to do, but it basically says that we're watching. We, the Supreme Court, are troubled by all these things, and it should not be happening in the courts. We, the courts, should not be dealing with this. It should be handled by the legislature. Now, a lot of you have probably heard this before, but who passes laws in this state? The legislature. Does the governor make law? No, he does not. Well, the governor is going to point to a section of law, 418 of the Texas Government Code, that says he can make law. If you've got a constitution that says one thing and a law that says another thing, which one's higher? Constitution. So then the question becomes, okay, when are we going to enforce this? Nobody would really be complaining about this if we were 2 days into it, if we were a week into it. But right around 2 weeks or so, we're going to start having problems. I was watching Casablanca last weekend. And as you may remember, whenever the magistrate there was shocked that there was gambling, and he shuts down Casablanca, and Rick then says to his money guy, how long can I last? And his money guy says, 2 or 3 weeks, Rick. You can last 2 or 3 weeks. That's reality. You can't shut down a business forever. It's like taking a plant and putting it in darkness and say, you just hold on, we're going to keep you in darkness for about 6 months. And then you can start growing again. The plant's going to be dead. People have other things that are going to be happening, that are going to be occurring. And so you can't just do this forever. And the courts are going to be open to these things. We have a number of cases that are kind of going through the system. But before I get off, I wanted to address something else here. The death of George Floyd is a serious matter, right? A serious tragedy, a murder. Okay, and we can talk about who's at fault. But what we do know is that there's one name that's never being discussed as partially part of that. The governor of Minnesota issued a stay-at-home order. That stay-at-home order shut down the restaurant where George Floyd was working, and he lost his job. These laws that these people just make up out of thin air have repercussions. George Floyd's death is going to go down as a murder. It's not going to go down as a coronavirus death. But I can tell you, and just like you see these movies all the time where you change one little thing and it changes the end. There's a million things that would have changed so that George Floyd would not be dead today. And one of them is a stay-at-home order. Now, the governor of Minnesota, Walz, I think his name is, Governor Walz, Tim Walz, he issued a stay-at-home order that shut down the restaurant that put pressure on George Floyd. Now, does that mean that Tim is responsible for the death? I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to say that. I'm just going to say to all the people who are making decisions, these things have impacts beyond what you think they are. Dr. Fauci he gets graded on one number, and that's the number of COVID-19 deaths. He doesn't get blamed for the increase of suicides. He doesn't get blamed for increase of crime, unrest. How many millions of dollars can be directly tied to Governor Walz's decision to shut down all the restaurants? And they're going to say, well, people are going to die. Maybe they were going to die. Maybe they weren't going to die. Maybe if you had simply said, cut all your capacities to 25%. Maybe if he had said, everybody have a plan to protect the lives of the people that are going into your restaurant. There's a million ways of doing these things. But to simply say, no, all of you guys got to close, puts pressure on people, and this pressure comes out in multiple ways. And so I think that that's something that people need to understand, that it's not a matter of saying it's jobs versus people or economy versus people. It's people versus people. Representative Toth, I think it was, that put out an essay that pointed out that we're deciding that the physically fragile are going to be preferred over the psychologically fragile. And I wouldn't even say it's psychologically fragile. About a third of our business is bankruptcy. And we've got a number of people that are contacting us that have 40-year-old, 50-year-old businesses that are dying. If you don't think that that puts serious pressure on people, then you're crazy. It's not just, well, it's all, you just have to sacrifice. When all those people that are saying just sacrifice, whenever somebody says that to you, you need to ask them, have you emptied your wallets completely and gotten rid of all of your wealth to help people who don't have any money? If they haven't done that, then they haven't sacrificed. And their call to sacrifice is meaningless. And you should call them out on it. So, what can you do? What you can do is make sure that all these tiny tyrants get voted out of office as soon as possible. You can at least let them know. Let them know that you're watching them. They usually operate in dark. Nobody knows what their county judge does. Tell them that you're watching and you're going to start voting and you're going to start paying attention to these things. People talk about mayors. Mayors win routinely with 10% of the vote. 10% of people showing up. If everybody that's upset about these things voted, we wouldn't have these issues. So join me in voting in November and let them know beforehand. Thank you.